Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted, the Friday edition. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger, and today's June 3rd, 2016.
If you're a longtime viewer of this program, you know that we have what's called the summer blues. Basically, June, July, August, there are times when there's really no news out in the Anglican news world to talk about. And so George and I either have to create a topic, create a controversy, or discuss things that are way above our head. We've decided to go with choice 3 today. We're going to talk about something that's way above our head. It's called ecumenicalism, or ecumenism, if you so desire. And we're going to talk about kind of the effects of the church in 2016 and some of the opportunities that have been brought about by the characters of the church to this day. And we're kind of seeing this played out in a small way at the ACNA bishop level, and in a larger way with denominations reaching out to each other and not just having talks, but having some pretty good discussions about a future life together. And I've been watching the papers, and I've been paying more and more attention with the appointment of, do you call it appointment, of Pope Francis? When God so ordains a soul, it's an appointment. Whatever. So, George and I'm going to sit down and talk about ecumenicalism and talk about it, how Anglicanism is being affected by it, how it's happened over the last probably 10 or 12 years, because everything before 1950 was just surface stuff. Now we're getting into some meaty stuff, George.
Well, I would say yes and no, Kevin. Mm-hmm. I would say ecumenism, on the surface, the institutional form of ecumenism is dead as a doornail. Mm-hmm. In other words, the church-to-church official dialogues like ARCIC, Anglican Roman Catholic International Commission, they're basically wasted times right now. But at the same time, parish to parish, person to person, if you will, diocese to diocese, talks and dialogues are doing far better than anyone could have imagined. There's more synergy and more excitement and more interest. There's more. Conservative Catholics find they have more in common with conservative Protestants than they do with some of their Roman Catholic contemporaries.
Well, a lot has changed in my eyes in the last 30 years, 40 years. I grew up in the Midwest. My father was a Missouri Synod Lutheran who married a Methodist. For marrying her, he was excommunicated from the Missouri Synod Lutheran Church. So I knew early on that there was denominational troubles. When I learned this when I was 12 and 13 years old, that Dad was kind of kicked out of church for marrying a Methodist. In his eyes, a very attractive Methodist, but nonetheless, I knew that there's problems between churches in little towns in the Midwest. When I went to high school in Verona, Wisconsin, the Baptist church would not talk to the Lutheran church, would not talk to the Methodist church, and everybody pointed fingers at the Roman Catholic Church. You don't want to go in there. And that was my youth, George.
When I was a little boy, I had a nanny. My brothers and I had a nanny, and her name was Peggy. And Peggy, as my mother would say, was just off the boat from Ireland. She came from Cork. And Peggy would take us to church from time to time for various activities or projects. And Peggy would never go inside the church. She would always sit on the little bench in the porch outside. And I once asked Peggy, why don't you come inside the church? And Peggy said, oh, Georgie, if I stepped inside, the floor would open up and Satan would drag me to hell for a good Catholic going into a Protestant church.
Sure.
That was the world. That was the world that we grew up in the 60s and 70s. That, from a church-to-church point of view, there was no conversation, but there were plenty of these goodwill and interfaith and ecumenical visits on the top. Now the situation's almost completely reversed.
It is, because I remember reading about meetings between church leaders and all the pre-prep they would have to do to make everybody happy before they even showed up. All the background stuff that, well, we're not going to have a Eucharist. And when we proceed down the middle aisle, this person has to be in line exactly with this person. Nobody's in front of each other. It's like, oh, my Lord. And we have come a long way, George. So much so that we see kind of behind the scenes things that are happening between churches where there seems to be a desire to have a future together.
Now, there are lots of reasons for this, but I think we're in a moment where there are some leaders who are willing to give up their kingdoms for the kingdom. And we mentioned a small little thing that happened in the ACNA, which to me is symptomatic, emblematic of the possibilities of Christians United, and that's Pair USA and ACNA. Recently, we had Pair USA in the Southern Diocese, Bishop David Bryan. That group basically voted to cease operations and merge into the Diocese of the Carolinas, and Bishop Bryan is now suffragan bishop of that diocese. Now, that makes perfect theological sense, it makes perfect business sense, it makes sense all across the sense.
Yes.
However, making sense has never driven the church. What has driven the church throughout history are egos and jealousies. I know this sounds cynical, but Bishop Bryan is acting like a man of God to further the kingdom of God. And it's and in the great scheme of things, that's a little step. For Bishop Bryan and Pair USA, it's a tremendous step, but it is a step of encouragement and excitement. It tells me that the talks that ACNA is doing with Lutherans and Methodists and Presbyterians and fellow travelers of a theological mindset, let alone talking to the Calvinists within their own midst, are beginning to pay off.
Yeah,
God seems to be doing something on the local level.
It is interesting to watch because you and I were in Plano, where Archbishop Duncan was able to gather all the cats from around North America and get them to agree to work together and to become the ACNA. And I remember talking to so many people there, said this isn't going to work. This is, you get 3 years. And after 3 years, this will be a back news item, breakaway church splits. And I'm like, it looks pretty messy because I see a lot of people in purple that are not happy with each other and not talking to each other and look away when they walk by each other. Like, how is this going to work? Well, over time,
not just in purple, Kevin.
Yeah.
I remember in Plano seeing these guys dressed. The clergy were all dressed in the choir
Sure.
outfits,
Yeah.
meaning they had a black tippet, cassock, surplice, and a tippet instead of a stole or Eucharistic vestments. And I saw these guys dressed up. They were all from Fort Worth and Quincy. And I said to one of my friends, "What is that outfit?" "Oh, well, they're members of the SSC. They're the super high Anglo-Catholics that," and I'm thinking, these guys aren't even Christian, let alone Episcopalian. I'm being arch when I say
he's being off the reservation, yes.
But there was a time in a not so recent past in our own lives where even within the Anglican way, Anglo-Catholics and conservative evangelicals wouldn't give each other the time of day. And the greatest fights, in the Church of England, for instance, the Anglo-Catholics blamed the evangelicals for giving up on women clergy. And the conservative evangelicals blamed today the Anglo-Catholics for giving up on the gay issue. And the shooting is more directed at historically was more closely aimed at their co-faithful. They happen to share the creeds rather than the real enemy. That seems to be passing away. And in the ACNA, except for some pockets of loons, and I don't know if I'm going to name anybody in particular, but you know who we're talking about.
I'm a loon, it's obvious, yes. No, but there is that reality.
Wonderful thing.
It's not perfect. Yeah, George and I are not saying that the ACNA is perfect or that this road forward with ecumenism is perfect. It's going to be messy. And there's going to be, like we said, shooting in the streets until we get to that point where we can help fulfill the prayer Jesus in John 17, where we can all be together.
Well, one of the things isn't perfect,
Mm,
for example, is on the international scene.
mm.
Francis has torpedoed the initiatives that Benedict put in place and fostered and encouraged. Francis has just torpedoed. And
Yeah,
that,
it's interesting to see. Pope Benedict set up some good talkways with, I would say, credo Christians, more of a conservative variety that said, listen, we got to start working together. Pope Francis has put out branches to every living creature and said we can all work together at the same level.
well, as a conservative evangelical, I didn't agree with Benedict on some doctrinal issues,
Hmm.
the Immaculate Conception, and the Assumption of Mary, so on and so forth. But I saw in him a person whom I admired, whose theology I found persuasive. I had no desire and have no desire to become a Roman Catholic, but I looked to Benedict as a leader of the faith. Francis I see as someone who wants the Catholic Church to become like the Episcopal Church, all the wrong elements of the Episcopal Church. And what we're seeing now is that the coalition of evangelicals and Catholics that sort of arose under the later years of John Paul and Benedict, that's sort of been frozen in place. And liberal Episcopalians think it's wonderful that they're now invited to Vatican things and that they're petted and welcomed, but they have no intention of changing any of their ways. No. And so the Roman Catholic Church is not going to get closer to the Episcopal Church, whereas the conservatives, who were the ones who were pushing for that closer relationship, now feel almost betrayed by the man upstairs in the Vatican.
Yeah, that man upstairs. No, the man at the Basilica.
Second floor.
Second floor.
Looking out over the St. Peter's Square. That's that upstairs there, not
sure.
Upstairs.
Or the dove lands on the sill when he's giving his sermon. I know what you're talking about. So the homily perch. But and that's kind of the reality we live in. Is there now is a desire where that desire wasn't there in the 1950s and 60s and 70s to have not relations, but to set a course where we can work together. Will there ever be an open table with the Roman Catholic Church? I was talking to a couple people that are high up in the Anglican Church, and in this discussion, I said, what is keeping us from closer relationships with the Roman Catholics? Said an open table. That would be the biggest step where, we have an open table. If they had an open table, that would bring things a lot further along.
But see, here's the problem, I think, with the ecumenical movement per se. The liberal wing of the Catholic Church, for instance, some of the bishops in England, for instance, Catholic bishops, are happy and like to talk about that. The German bishops like to talk about the open table. And on one level, that would be encouraging to conservative Anglican leaders. But what they mean by that, what they understand by that, is at cross purposes. So frankly, I don't think an issue of open communion for the Catholic Church is really where the ecumenical movement need go. I think they should preserve their distinctiveness, because I don't believe in the sacrifice of the Mass the way a Roman Catholic does, and for them to water it down to accommodate me makes what they do a joke. Yet, if we stand together on moral issues as issues of faith, on issues that are important to the people in the pews, not to the bishops, I think the ecumenical movement has a tremendous future. It just has got to get out of the clutches of the bishops.
Yeah, it does. Well, and that's why we see such great success at local levels. Here in Milford, the churches work together to solve problems. Now, there's not a lot of churches. This is New England. We're talking 12 churches with 30 people each. But they do work together because they're kind of forced to. With those numbers, they have no choice but to use their synergy together to get things done.
We are seeing, our church, I would say half to 2/3 of the people are not Episcopalians when they first enter into the building. Mm-hmm. They come from other traditions, other denominations. We've even had people come from no faith and other faiths who've gone on to become baptized and faithful Christians. Last month, our congregation was invited to go to the synagogue and celebrate a Holocaust Day.
Mm-hmm.
And for us, that was a tremendous honor because they have the Jewish synagogue has a portion of the ceremony of lighting a candle in memory of the righteous Gentiles, those non-Jews who went out of the Oscar Schindlers, if you will.
Sure.
And we as a congregation were invited to participate in that celebration of the righteous Gentiles and of the commemoration of the Holocaust. When I was growing up, the very thought that of a church doing something in a synagogue was, sorry folks, we're not going there.
That's right. Gee.
But with the conservative Jewish congregation, we have so much in common on social issues, on life issues, on marriage issues, on sexuality issues. It's just a different world, and it's such an exciting time.
It is. I mean, as a journalist and as a Christian, this is, in my humble opinion, the greatest time to be alive in the church, because the core.
It's so good and so bad.
It's so good and so bad. The course is together. Yes, there are still splits at the church, but they're really dividing on some really important theological issues. We're not dividing on whether or not we need to remodel the church. You're dividing on some very important eternal life discussion issues. And so, all right, George, we've come. Yeah.
Kevin, I must confess, we are divided in the church about remodeling.
Uh-oh.
And it comes down to blue versus red kneeler covers.
You got to be careful. You could lose 30% of your congregation overnight if you make the, and George is not making too much, that's not something that's at light, because I've been in rooms where clergy start the discussion of which is the best prayer book. And that's time, as a journalist, I'll never get back. Those 2 hours of absolute blur as these men argue about prayer book, I'm like, well, maybe we got a long way to go, but it's good. It's good. All right, George, we've given 17 minutes of our best to our Friday audience. We want to thank you for watching. We're actually raising money because we got some traveling to do this summer. I'll be going to Texas for the Anglican Way Institute. I'll be going to Forward in Faith in Illinois. I'll be going to the conference that's in San Diego. I forget the name. And some other stuff. So I need to raise money for plane tickets and hotels and rent-a-cars. So please go to anglicaninc.com/donate. There's a button there. You can send a check or PayPal or credit card, whatever you want to do.
And I have two daughters in college, so any help you can give me will be greatly appreciated.
Yes. Anything would help. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger, and you've been watching episode 231 of Anglican Unscripted.
Yeah, it's the post episode that I'm like, I don't use that muscle very much. I don't sit up straight enough.
Do you have bees or mowers?
Sorry, this is the parade day.
Ah.
We got lucky that they weren't parading out in front, but there's all these little small segments of grass in front of everybody's condo. Grass driveway, and so they take there he is.
Sounds like you're in a hovercraft.
Yeah,
actually,
he's right up there. This is the guy. They did the parade of lawnmowers came down about 45 minutes ago. Now it's the parade of leaf blowers to blow the grass that actually got in the driveway. And so we'll have up to 6 or 7. It's annoying because they walk so slow. I wouldn't mind if they ran blowing the leaves. And they'll just do the parade all the way down to the end, and then they push all the grass and clutter into a bag, and then they're almost done. Then they come with the clippers for all the shrubberies. It's just...
thinking of... I had to work Monday, Memorial Day at the church. Monday's a working day. So I took Tuesday morning off to compensate. And we had, in our area, the gardeners come by But we are so far in the deep south that all of our gardeners are whites. We don't even have legal aliens working. But I was underneath the car, and I had a stuck bolt. I'm rebuilding the transmission,
Of course, everybody does that.
and I couldn't get it, so I got from my little handy dandy toolkit a blowtorch, my little blowtorch, which I love to use, but Susan doesn't like me to use it because she knows that
You'll
boys
burn
are
your
fire.
face off. Yes.
So I'm under the car with like 2 inches clearance between my nose and the bolt, and I'm up there with a little butane flame thrower, trying to get this bolt to loosen. And the guy comes by in the driveway and blows off all the grass while I'm under the car, and the flame, that gust of air sort of pushed the flame sideways, and all of a sudden the transmission pan started to smoke because I started setting on fire. And I remembered, didn't they say something about drain the oil before
Yes, absolutely.
you try to remove the bolts with the torch? So fortunately the car did not blow up. But
Well, George, you have to understand, it's really simple. You have 2 daughters. You have twins. Susan has 2 daughters and a son. Okay, a 12-year-old boy. And who you have a reputation for cutting your fingers. Having. Yep. I mean, and so she.
actually the nut fell on my chest and I got a burn mark.
It's,
Because I didn't want to get my... See, the thing is, when you wear mechanics clothes, they're so expensive. So it's just cheaper not just to go out there in a bathing suit and lie.
burning cream is much cheaper than a burn. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it saves washing because Susan gets mad if I put an oily T-shirt into the laundry because it turns all the towels sort of gray. And so this hot nut landed on my... and burned the hair on my... Oh, lots of fun.